The crack in the wall was 4 inches long, diagonal, running from the window frame toward the ceiling. Daisies had been staring at it for 11 minutes. It was the only thing in Chief Tabena Iwanyanwu's compound that was not looking back at her. 43 people stood in a half-circle in that courtyard, and none of them spoke. Chief Tabena walked a slow circle around her, the way a man walks around something before he decides what it is worth, and Daisy kept her eyes on the crack. He picked up her right hand without asking, turned it over, pressed his thumb into her palm like a market trader, checking a bolt of cloth, then said to the gathering, "Seamstress hands, good. I cannot take a wife who is completely without function." He released her hand and let it fall. "She will not embarrass me. That is enough." Nobody moved. Mrs. Isajirika, 3 rows back, nodded as if he had said something reasonable. Her father, Nzeogwu Chima, stood near the gate with his hands clasped and his eyes on the ground. Pastor Odili held his Bible against his chest and said nothing. Daisy put her hand back at her side. She looked at the crack. Still 4 inches. Still there. She had not cried. She would not cry here. 21 days later, 3 vehicles entered this village. The man who stepped out of the lead car did not come to claim her. He came to do something that made every person standing in this courtyard that afternoon wish they had spoken when it still mattered. Stay with me. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and please subscribe. Let's go. To understand how Adeze Chima ended up standing in that courtyard with 43 people watching and no one speaking, you have to go back 6 years. 6 years, and a series of decisions that each seemed reasonable on the day they were made. Nzeogwu Chima was not a bad farmer. That was the important thing to understand. He was not lazy, not dishonest, not the kind of man who borrowed money with no intention of paying it back. He was a man who had farmed 3 hectares of cassava and yam in Umueze for 22 years, who woke before 5 every morning to check the soil, who saved carefully and bought equipment that other men in the village said he did not need, and that he believed, genuinely, would change his yield in the years ahead. The equipment failed after 8 months. The first loan was 480,000 naira, taken from Chief Tabena Iwanyanwu in the spring of 2018, when the tractor's hydraulic pump seized and Nzeogwu needed to repair it before the next planting season. Chief Tabena was the man you went to in Umueze when the bank said no, which was always. He charged interest, but not impossibly, 12% per annum, compounded quarterly, which sounded like something you could manage when you were standing in his parlor, with your harvest 2 months away and your soil waiting. The second loan came in 2019, when the rains failed. The third came in 2020, when the rains arrived 3 weeks late, and then came all at once, and destroyed what the dry season had not already taken. In November 2021, Nkechi Chima's appendix ruptured on a Sunday night. The nearest hospital with a functioning theater was 47 kilometers away. They took her in a borrowed truck, Nzeogwu and the neighbor's son, driving too fast on a road that had 3 craters deep enough to swallow a wheel. She survived. The surgery, the recovery, the complications from a minor infection that set in on the 4th day, the follow-up visits, the medication she needed for 6 weeks afterward, all of it cost 847,000 naira, money that Nzeogwu did not have. Money that Chief Tabena provided on a Tuesday morning, without a moment of hesitation, which Nzeogwu had always thought was a kindness, and which he understood, much later, in a different light entirely. By January of 2024, the total amount owed to Chief Tabena Iwanyanwu was 3,700,000 naira. He had written this number on a piece of paper so many times that the paper had gone soft at the folds. He could not reach it in a single farming year. He could not reach it in 2. The interest compounded, and the yields varied, and the fuel prices changed, and every year the gap closed a little, and then opened again. and he was 52 years old, and the arithmetic was not getting better. He was a man drowning slowly, which is the worst kind of drowning, because you have enough time to see exactly what is happening, and not enough force to stop it. Chief Tabena Ivuanyanwu called Nzogwu to his house on a Thursday evening in March. Not to the main parlor, where he received visitors he respected. To the back room, the narrow one with metal shelves and the smell of old kerosene. Nzogwu noticed this distinction. He sat on the wooden chair across from the table, and he waited while Tabena poured himself a glass of orange squash and did not offer one. "Your situation has become a problem," Tabena said. He was not unkind about it. He was not anything about it. He said it the way you announce the weather. "Sir, I am working on." "You have been working on it for 6 years." Tabena set down his glass. "I am not an unreasonable man. I have extended your terms 3 times. I am 60 years old in Nzogwu. My patience is a resource I have already spent most of." Nzogwu said nothing. Tabena looked at him for a long moment, the look of a man who has already made his decision and is waiting for the moment to be right. "I have a proposal," he said, and then he said it. He said it the way you would propose a market arrangement. Calmly, without heat, as though the logic of it was too clear to require much explanation. He was a widower, he said. He was in need of a wife who was young enough to manage his household with some energy, sensible enough not to cause disruption, and from a family that understood what they owed and would not make difficulties. He would forgive the entire debt. All 3,700,000 naira. He would also settle Nkechi's remaining clinic balance of 127,000. In exchange, Adaeze Chima would become his 3rd wife. The traditional rites would be conducted within the month. "She is 23, Tabena said. He said this as though confirming that a piece of merchandise was the right size. "Old enough, she sews, she is quiet. She has no other arrangements that I know of." Nzogwu's hands were clasped on the table. He looked at them. "She is my daughter," he said. "I know whose daughter she is." Tabena picked up his glass again. "That is precisely why I am making this offer to you, and not to someone else." There was a silence. Outside, a generator started somewhere down the road, and the sound of it filled the room in the way that only machines can fill a silence, not replacing it, but sitting inside it. Nzogwu went home that evening and told himself 3 things. That Adaeze would have a comfortable life in Tabena's house because Tabena had money and money made life easier. That the debt had reached a point where no realistic path led out of it. That there was no other way. He told himself these 3 things in different orders for 4 days. On the 5th day, he went back and said yes. He came home that evening and sat down at the kitchen table while Nkechi stood at the stove making iba, her back to him, her arms moving in the steady rhythm she had kept for 30 years in that kitchen. She looked at him once over her shoulder and then looked back at the pot. She already knew. The way women in long marriages know things without being told. She had read it in his shoulders before he crossed the threshold. She did not ask him anything. She finished making the iba and set it on the table and sat across from him. They ate in silence. He could not look at her face. She could not look at his. At 11:30 that night, Nkechi came into Adaeze's room. Adaeze was still awake, sitting at her sewing table under the single yellow bulb, hemming a dress for a woman in the next compound. 3 more dresses waited on the table, pinned and marked. The room smelled of cotton thread and the tin of shea butter she kept on the windowsill. She had work to finish by Friday. "Adaeze," her mother said. Then Nkechi sat down on the edge of the bed, and both her hands came up and covered her mouth. As though by covering her mouth, she could keep what she had to say inside, and somehow it would not have to land. "Your father has decided," she said, her hands still over her mouth. "He has decided something." The way she said that word, decided, as though it had been scraped off something sharp. Adaeze set down her needle. She turned on the stool. She looked at her mother's hands over her face, at what her mother's eyes were doing above them, and she said, "Tell me," Nkechi told her. When she was done, the room was completely quiet. The generator outside had gone off. The single bulb hummed. Adiezi turned back to her table, and she looked at the fabric in front of her, and she picked up her needle. "Okay," she said. "Adiezi, go and sleep, Mama." Her mother left. Adiezi sat at her sewing table with the dress in her hands, and she did not work, and she did not cry. She sat there until the sky began to change color at 5 in the morning, when she folded the dress carefully onto the finished pile, straightened the things on her table, and went to lie down for 40 minutes before the day began. She did not tell anyone what had happened. She did not need to. By the following afternoon, everyone in Umuzeze already knew. Mrs. Uchenna Ihejirika was 55 years old and had spent most of those years in the specific occupation of knowing things before other people did and making sure the gap didn't last long. She told 4 women on Monday. By Wednesday, it was the whole Thursday prayer group. By Friday, the men who sat under the mango tree near the borehole had heard it from their wives, and the women who sold tomatoes in the small market by the church had heard it from the men. "Chief is taking Nziogu's debt in exchange for the girl," she told each person, in the same voice she used to report the price of Gary at the Equilobia market. "It is not unusual. The debt is real. Better she goes to a man who can provide than the whole family starves." 3 women agreed with this. One said, "Chief is old, but he has money." Another said, "At least she will eat well in that house." 2 others looked uncertain but said nothing. Ugochi Eze's mother, who had known Nkechi since they were both girls attending the same Sunday school, went home and sat in her kitchen for a long time, without speaking to anyone. Nobody called the local government office. Nobody knocked on Zeogu's door to say, "This is not right." The weight of what had been decided pressed down on the village the way a flat sky presses before rain. Not violent, just immovable. The contrast in how people lived was not something anyone needed to announce. Chief Tabena's compound had a generator that ran from 6 in the evening until midnight. 3 motorcycles sat in the covered side of his yard. Through an open window, visible from the road, was the blue light of a television set. His second wife's grave was in the back corner of the compound, under a slab of cement with her name. His first wife had left the village 8 years ago, and no one spoke of her. Nziogu Chima's house had a cistern with a crack, patched with cement every rainy season. The electricity had gone out in June of 2023, and he had not been able to pay the reconnection fee. The single solar lantern in the kitchen was the brightest light in the house after dark. 3,700,000 naira. That was the distance between those 2 households, measured in loans and failed rains and a ruptured appendix on a Sunday night. It was not an abstraction. It was not something you could argue your way past with principle alone. It was a number on a soft piece of paper, and a man who had run out of ways to make it smaller. Adaze understood this. She did not excuse it. She understood it the way you understand the weight of something that has already fallen, not by stopping it, but by knowing exactly what it is. She went to work the following morning at 7:15, as usual. The presentation was set for 3 weeks from the Thursday of Tabena's announcement. Adaze was told she should be at his compound by 2 in the afternoon. She should wear her good wrapper. She should be ready to meet the people who needed to meet her. She wore the dark blue Ankara. It was the one she had sewn herself 3 years ago, from fabric her aunt had brought from Onitsha. She had worn it twice, once to her cousin's wedding, once to a church program in Nui, where she had not known anyone and had sat in the back and left early. It was the best thing she owned. She pressed it carefully with the iron heated on the kerosene stove, because the electricity had not come back. She did her hair. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the basin in her room. She held her own gaze for 7 seconds. Then she put the mirror face down. That was the afternoon we already know. The crack in the wall, the 43 people. Chief Tabena's thumb in her palm. She will not embarrass me. That is enough. What the opening of this story did not show you was what happened when it ended. After Tabena made his declaration, after the gathered people began to talk among themselves, in the careful voices of people who have just witnessed something they will need to revise their understanding of. Later, Adeze walked to where Ugochi was standing near the gate. Ugochi Eze was 25, 4 inches taller than Adeze, and had been her closest friend since they were both 12 and had failed the same mathematics examination and sat together under a mango tree crying about it, which was how the best friendships often start. She was the kind of person who felt everything in her whole body. Joy made her hands open. Grief made her stoop. Right now she was stooped, as though something invisible was pressing on her shoulders. Adeze took her hand, not to be comforted, to stop Ugochi from making a scene. "Not here," Adeze said quietly. Ugochi pressed her lips together so hard they went pale. "Then where?" she said. "Later," Adeze said. "We will talk later." They walked home together the long way, past the borehole and the mango tree, and the place where the old primary school had been before the roof collapsed, and the government never sent replacement materials. They did not speak much. When they reached the junction where their roads separated, Ugochi pulled her into a hug so sudden and hard that Adeze had to step back to catch her balance. "I am not going to pretend this is acceptable," Ugochi said against her shoulder. "I know," Adeze said. "Someone needs to. Go home, Ugochi." She stepped back, held her friend at arm's length, and looked at her directly. "Go home and let me think." She went home. She sat at her sewing table. She picked up the dress she had put down the night Nkechi had come to her room, still pinned, still marked, waiting, and she began to work on it again. Her hands were steady. The thread was steady. The needle found the cloth the way it always did. She kept going. On the third day after the presentation, Pastor James Odili came by. He was a careful man, Pastor Odili, the kind of pastor who visited when there was difficulty because he believed visiting was the work, and who sometimes understood too late that his presence could be received as something other than comfort. He sat with Nzeogwu on the wooden bench outside. He said things about God's plan and difficult seasons and the wisdom of elders. He said things about the weight of debt and the responsibility a father carries for his family. He offered a prayer that used words like wisdom and provision and union, and that managed carefully to avoid the words wrong and child and selling. Adeze sat inside and listened through the open window. She kept her needle moving. When he left, she heard her father's footsteps come back into the house and stop just outside her door. He stood there, unmoving, for almost a minute. Then, his footsteps moved away down the hall. She kept sewing. The 21 days had a texture that she would remember, long after the specific sequence of events had blurred at the edges. The mornings were the easiest. She woke before 6, made tea on the kerosene stove, sat at her table in the early light. Orders came in the way they always did, because Adeze Chima was the most reliable seamstress in 3 compounds, and people needed things made regardless of what was being done to the woman making them. A woman from Nkwo Aba needed a dress for her son's graduation in Lagos. A neighbor wanted a wrapper taken in at the waist. A woman from the next town brought 2 yards of lace and a specific request for a blouse, with a particular sleeve she had seen in a magazine. Adeze took the measurements. She quoted prices. She set her deadlines, and she kept them. The evenings were harder. The light was insufficient for fine work, and the silence in the house had a particular weight to it. Not the comfortable silence of people who are at ease, but the silence of people who have things they cannot say within earshot of each other. Her mother moved around her carefully, as though Adeze had been repositioned in a room, and Nkechi kept almost walking into her in the dark. Her father she rarely saw. He left early and came back late, and when he was home, he was in the yard or in the small room he called his study, Really, just the room with the broken cooler and the boxes he had never unpacked from the time they moved 5 years ago. He found things to do in there. It was remarkable how many things a man could find to do in a room with nothing in it. She did not try to make it easier for him. She had decided that much at least. Day 10. Mrs. Equency came at 9:15, when the morning light was still clean. She was 67, short and deliberate in her movements, a widow who had lived at the far end of the 2nd Street for as long as a Daisy could remember. She brought a dress wrapped in old newspaper, a formal dress, dark green, with a side seam that had come apart at the hip. She set it on the table and looked at it and then looked at a Daisy. "I don't have money now," she said. She said it without embarrassment or apology, the flat, factual statement of someone who has made peace with the arithmetic of her situation. "I will have it after the naming ceremony next month. 2,000 naira, if that is all right." A Daisy looked at the split seam. 20 minutes, maybe 30. The fabric was old, but it still had dignity in it. "Leave it," she said. "Come and pick it up Thursday." "But I can't pay until—" "Mrs. Equency." A Daisy folded the dress over her arm. "I know. Thursday." The old woman stood and smoothed her blouse and looked at Adaye in the way that older women look at younger ones when they want to say something they are not sure they have the right to say. In the end, she only said, "God will bless your hands." She left. Adaye hung the green dress on the line and turned back to her work. What she did not know was that Chief Tabena Wanyanwu had been walking past the front of her compound at that exact moment. He had heard the exchange through the open door. He stopped. He listened. Then he walked in without knocking, as though he had already, in his own mind, acquired the right to. And he stood in the doorway of her workroom. "You do this often?" he said. Adaze looked up from the table. She did not stand. "Do what, sir?" "Give your work away." He looked around her room. The fabric rolls stacked against the wall, the good scissors on the hook, the iron on its stand, the needle case that her grandmother had given her. Work for nothing, like a street vendor throwing spoiled fruit at the end of market day, because it will only rot if she keeps it. He folded his arms. A woman who cannot value her own labor does not know how to manage a household. That is not useful to me. Adaze set down the piece she was working on. She looked at him. "Mrs. Equency's husband has been dead for 4 years, she said. She has been wearing that green dress to every important occasion since his funeral, because it is the only good one she has, and she cannot afford another. It has a split seam. I am going to repair it." She picked up her work again. "What I charge for my own labor is a decision I make for myself, sir. I did not think you came here to review my business practices." Something shifted in Tabena's expression. Not anger. Something more controlled, more filed away. "You have a very capable mouth," he said. "I was told it is useful," she said, her eyes on the cloth. "For speaking." 4 seconds of silence. Her hands kept moving on the fabric. Tabena stood in the doorway. Outside, a keek passed on the road, its small engine buzzing and fading. Then he laughed, short, flat, the laugh of a man noting something in a ledger. "I will see you in 11 days, he said. He left. Adaze put down her work and pressed both hands flat on the table and breathed. Slowly. Once, twice, once more. Then she picked up the cloth and kept going. Mrs. Equency, who had paused at the road to adjust her wrapper, heard the whole exchange through the open window. She stood very still until the sound of Tabena's footsteps had faded entirely. Then she went home and sat in her kitchen a long time, not preparing anything, just sitting. On day 12, she started the notebook. It was an ordinary exercise book, the green-covered kind that primary school children use, that she bought 3 at a time from the stationery shop in Equilobia and used for tracking her orders. She had a spare one. She opened it on a blank page. She did not write orders in it. She wrote letters. She was not sure afterward why letters in particular. She had no one to send them to. She addressed the first one to no one and then crossed that out and addressed it to her father because he was the person she had the most to say to and the least ability to say any of it in the same room as him. "Dear Papa," she wrote. She thought for a while. Then, "I have decided that if you cannot protect me, I will have to build my own walls. This does not mean I am not your daughter. It means I am becoming someone who cannot rely on you to know the difference between love and desperation. I am not sure you know the difference anymore. I am not sure you ever did when it came to the things you most needed to protect. I want you to know that I see you clearly. Not as a monster. You are not a monster. Just as a frightened man who made the wrong choice. In some ways, that is worse. A monster you can explain. A frightened man who loves you and still handed you away. I am still working out what to do with that." She closed the notebook. She held it against her chest for a moment. Then she put it under the fabric rolls on the bottom shelf, where she kept the things she was not ready to look at directly. It was Ugochi who noticed first. Not that anything specific had changed. Adieze still came to the door when Ugochi knocked, still sat in the evenings when the compound cooled enough to make sitting outside bearable, still talked and listened and sometimes laughed at the right moments. But there was a quality to her that had not been there before, a steadiness that was not peace. More like a decision that had been made and was now being inhabited. "You are planning something," Ugochi said one evening. They were on the low wall, watching the bats come out of the mango tree as the sky changed color. "I am not planning anything dramatic, if that is what you mean. You are not falling apart. No. Which is what he is counting on you to do. I know." Ugochi looked at her profile for a long moment. "So what are you doing then, if not planning and not falling apart?" Adeze was quiet. A bat made an adjustment mid-flight, a tiny correction, and disappeared into the dark. "I am finding out what I know," she said finally. "That is something I can do right now. Find out what I know." The evening of day 7 happened in a different place entirely, in a way that Adieze would not learn about for another 2 weeks. Equilobia. Not Lagos. Not far away. Not in some other world. 34 kilometers from Umueze down a road that was currently in the process of being assessed for resurfacing, which meant it existed in the particular limbo of something that has been identified as a problem, but not yet fixed. A man named Izuchukwu Ofordili had been in and out of this area for 10 days. Moving between a staging ground his company had rented near the Agwata junction and the survey sites his team was working along the proposed road corridor. He had left Umies 9 years ago. He had been 23, carrying a scholarship he'd borrowed money to keep active, and 2 changes of clothes and the specific conviction that comes from having nothing left to lose in a place. He had not come back often. His mother had passed 3 years after he left, and he had come back for that and for the burial. And then he had returned to the work. The village was not a place he thought about every day. He was 32 now. He ran a company that had 12 permanent employees, and a government subcontract and a reputation in the specific world of infrastructure project management for being the kind of operation that delivered on schedule in places where no one delivered on schedule. He drove a company vehicle with a green and gold logo on the door and wore shirts that fit correctly and did not think about Umueze on most days. On the evening of day 7, at 9:43 at night, his phone lit up with a name, Obiora. His cousin, 29 years old, still in the village, still at the agricultural supplies shop on the main road, where he had worked since finishing secondary school. He answered. "Bro," Obiora said. "You need to hear something." Obiora told it quickly and without embellishment, the way a man tells something he has been thinking about how to say for several days. He told him about the debt and the terms and the 3 weeks. He told him about the presentation that had already happened in Tabena's compound, and what Tabena had said, and how many people had been there. He told him about Adeze. Izuchukwu was sitting in the front seat of his Land Cruiser, Parked outside the compound, his team was using as a temporary base. The engine was off. Through the windscreen, a security light cast a yellow stripe across a stretch of red earth and the corner of a zinc fence. He had been going through a spreadsheet when the phone rang. The spreadsheet was still open on the seat beside him. He did not speak. He looked at the strip of orange light on the earth outside, and he was silent for 11 seconds. He knew the name Adeyeze Chima. He knew it the way you know the name of something that fed you when you had nothing. Not analytically, not as memory, but as something that lives in a part of you that does not forget. He had been 18 years old. 4 days before he boarded the bus that would take him out of Umueze. For the last time, he had eaten almost nothing. Not dramatically, not as a story he told himself about hardship, just the quiet arithmetic of a family with nothing to spare, and a boy who was leaving and did not want to take anything with him when he went. He had been staying out of sight, out of the way, trying not to cost anything in his final days. Adeyeze Chima was 14. She appeared at the back of his family's compound on the morning of his 4th hungry day, carrying a covered enamel bowl. She set it down on the low wall without saying anything first. Rice and pepper soup still hot. The smell of it reached him before she took the cover off. "My mother made too much," she said. She did not wait for a thank you. She went back through the gap in the fence between their compounds. A girl in her school uniform with her bag on one shoulder, moving with the particular purposefulness of someone who has done what they came to do. Her mother had not made too much. He knew this the moment she said it. She knew he knew. Neither of them said anything else. He boarded the bus 4 days later. He did not come back. Now, 11 seconds of silence in a parked car outside a zinc fence in Equilobia. And then he said, "Send me the debt figure and who holds the note." Obiora said, "It's Chief Tabena." He knew that name. Everyone who grew up in Umueze knew that name. "I'll call you back," he said. He sat in the car for 20 more minutes. He was a man who thought before he acted, which was most of the reason his projects ran on schedule and his employees trusted him. You could feel the thinking, something turning and finding its angles, identifying the problem correctly before reaching for the solution. What he knew, sitting in that car, was that he could drive to Umwezi the next morning. He could walk into Tabena's compound and say things. He could be angry in the articulate, well-funded way that a man with resources can afford to be angry. And it would accomplish very little. Because the mechanism needed to be the right one, and the right mechanism was not anger. He opened his contacts, found the number for Barrister Helen Nwankwo, Equilobia. He would call her in the morning. He drove back to the compound and went to sleep. On day 9, Barrister Helen Nwankwo's office, Market Road, Equilobia. The office was modest from the outside, a 2-room suite on the 2nd floor of a building that housed a pharmacy and a printing shop below it. Inside, it was organized with the precision of someone who knows that the appearance of order is not decorative. It inspires confidence. Confidence wins cases. Helen Nwankwo was 38 years old. She had been called to the Nigerian bar at 25. And had spent the intervening years developing a specific skill, which was the ability to identify the correct mechanism in complicated situations and operate it without fuss. She wore glasses for reading that she took off when she was making a point she wanted you to see coming clearly. She had her glasses off when Izu sat across from her. "Forced debt for marriage arrangement," he said. "The girl is 23. The ceremony is in 12 days. The debt is legitimate. It was borrowed, it accumulated. The marriage arrangement was made to clear it. Vapivine 15, Helen said immediately. And the marriage act. Yes. Has she refused formally? She has not been given a mechanism to refuse formally. The community considers it settled. Who is the creditor? Chief Tabena Iwanyanwu, Umueze. And you want to pay the debt, all of it. Principal, interest at CBN standard rate. Every naira. Helen picked up her pen. She wrote something. What is the total? He gave her the figure. She wrote it down and did not visibly react to it, which was one of the things he appreciated about her. "And then?" she said. "And then a formal legal notice that the debt is settled, that any marriage arrangement contingent on that debt is dissolved, and that proceeding with the ceremony would be a violation of federal law. Sent by registered courier, signature required. If he ignores it, then we are in front of the ministry before the ceremony happens. And you?" Helen looked at him over the table. "You are going in person." "Yes." "When?" 3 days before the ceremony. I am already 34 kilometers away. I have project work in the area, legitimate work. My team has been here 10 days. Helen set down her pen. She looked at him for a moment in the way she looked at things she was assessing for structural soundness. "Do not go to make a speech," she said finally. "Men like Tobena do not back down from speeches. They back down from documented facts they cannot argue with, and consequences they cannot avoid. Let the paper work. Let the money work. When you stand in that compound, let the documents do the talking." "I know," he said. "Good." She picked her pen back up. "I will need the transfer to go through the bank's certified wire system, with a full reference description. Debt settlement, names, your company reference. Nothing informal. If he accepts the money, he has accepted that the debt is cleared. And if he refuses the transfer? He won't." She wrote something else. "Nobody refuses money, Izuchukwu. That is the oldest truth in law." The transfer was processed on day 12 at 11:47 in the morning. The bank confirmation arrived at 2:14 in the afternoon. Chief Tobena Iwanyanwu's account had received 4,631,000 naira. The reference field said exactly what Helen Nwankwo had specified. The formal letter went out by registered courier on day 10. The delivery receipt came back on day 11, signed in handwriting that was not Tobena's, which meant he had sent someone else to receive it, which was itself a kind of answer. Chief Tobena did not call. He did not respond to the letter. He pocketed 4,631,000 naira into his account and kept planning the ceremony. On day 11, Adeze woke before 5, dressed quietly, and told her mother she was going to Equilobia. Her mother looked at her the way she had been looking at her for 11 days, with the careful attention of someone watching a person they love walk a narrow path and not being sure whether to speak. "For what?" she asked. "I need to find something out." Nekechi looked at her daughter's face for 3 seconds. Then she went to the pot on the counter where she kept household money and pressed 500 naira into Adeze's hand. Adeze took it. They both knew it was not enough for the return trip, and neither of them said this. Adeze made up the rest from her savings pouch. 14,700 naira, the careful accumulation of weeks of work. She took 1,500 for the cake fare. She put the pouch back under the fabric on the shelf and went out. The cake to Equilobia took 41 minutes over a road that had been opened for resurfacing and not yet put back together. She sat in the back with 2 other women, one with a basket of eggs wrapped in cloth, one holding a folder of documents against chest. Adeze watched the red laterite road through the open side of the kike, watched it give way to tarmac as they came into town. The Legal Aid Council office was in a government building near the local secretariat. The sign above the door had faded to the point where you had to know what it said before you could read it. There were 4 plastic chairs in the narrow waiting room, and a ceiling fan that moved slowly and did not cool anything. She waited 40 minutes. The woman who came out and called her name was about 35, in a government batik uniform, with the face of someone who has seen enough difficult things to have developed a professionally steady expression as a form of self-preservation. Her nameplate said Miss Adiora Yumzulik. She led Adeze into a small office with a wooden desk and a window that looked out at a concrete wall. Adeze sat down and explained the situation. She explained it the way she did most things, factually, without decoration, from the beginning to where things currently stood. Miss Umazulik listened and made 2 notes on a yellow pad. When a days was done, the woman set down her pen. "What you have described," she said, "violates Section 3 of the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act 2015, which prohibits coerced marriage, including arrangements made under financial pressure. It also violates Section 3(1) of the Matrimonial Causes Act, which requires the free and full consent of both parties. The arrangement you have described is illegal." "I know it is illegal," Adais said. "What I want to know is what I can do about it before the ceremony, which is in 10 days. Miss Umezulike looked at her. She did not look away. "We can file a formal objection with the Anambra State Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Welfare. We can also serve notice to the parties involved that this office is aware and will escalate if the ceremony proceeds." A pause, but without dedicated legal representation to push the process, and our current roster is managing a significant backlog, the formal response would take between 3 and 6 months to reach the relevant parties through official channels. "The ceremony is in 10 days, Adais said. "I know. So the law exists." "The law exists, but the law cannot move in 10 days. Miss Umezulike did not look away. "In this instance, not through our office, no." Adais held this for a moment. She looked at the window and the concrete wall outside it. Then she said, "Can I have something in writing? A document that shows I came here and that confirms what the law says about my situation, on official letterhead." Miss Umezulike hesitated for exactly the amount of time it took her to decide that this was a reasonable request and that she had the authority to fulfill it. She typed for 4 minutes and printed a single page. It summarized the relevant provisions of VAP 2015 and the Marriage Act, addressed formally to Adeze Chima, with the Legal Aid Council letterhead and the office stamp. Adeze took the page, folded it into 3, and placed it in the inner pocket of her bag. "Thank you," she said. She went back down the stairs and found the cake junction and took the ride back to Umueze in the reverse direction, the tarmac giving way to laterite, the buildings thinning out, the light changing character as they moved away from the town. The woman with the eggs was not on this return trip. The woman with the folder was not either. There was only a man in a white shirt who fell asleep before they reached the first junction and did not wake until the driver announced the final stop. She got home at 2 in the afternoon. She changed her clothes. She sat down at her sewing table and picked up the work she had left. She did not tell anyone where she had been, but she carried the folded page in the inner pocket of the bag she took everywhere. She did not know that the previous day, Izuchukwu Ofodili had been in that same town, had sat in an office on Market Road 2 kilometers from the Legal Aid Council building, while Helen Nwankwo outlined the mechanism that would clear the debt and dissolve the arrangement. Did not know that the letter had already been sent, or that the transfer was already going through. Did not know any of this. She knew only what she had found in the legal aid office, that she had rights, that the law acknowledged those rights, and that the law was slower than 10 days. She carried this knowledge the way she had been carrying everything for 11 days. Quietly, in the part of her that had decided it was going to remain intact, no matter what this village decided to do. On day 15, Adeze sewed a dress that no one had ordered. She had been looking at the fabric since her aunt had sent it from Onitsha 2 years ago. Deep wine-colored brocade, the kind that had weight to it, that moved with authority. Her mother had wrapped it in an old cloth and put it at the back of the wardrobe with a single instruction. For something special, don't touch it yet. On the morning of day 15, her mother was at the market, and her father was on his land, and the compound was empty, and the light was coming in at the angle she liked best. She got the fabric out. She sat at her table, and she cut it the way you cut something important. Not quickly, not carelessly, with the attention that the material deserved. She sewed it the way she sewed the things she was proudest of. Seams twice done, Hem precisely turned, the zipper aligned, so that it would open without catching, would close without pulling. She pressed it with the iron and hung it on the door of her room. It was the most beautiful thing she had made in 2 years, maybe longer. She looked at it for a while. She did not try it on. She folded it carefully, wrapped it back in the cloth, and put it in the wardrobe. Ugochi came that evening and found her on the low wall, watching the bats. "You look different," Ugochi said. "I made something today." "What?" "Something that's mine." She looked at the tree, at the bats making their adjustments in the failing light. "Even when every other thing is being decided by someone else, what I make with my hands is mine. No one can take it back." Ugochi sat beside her. "You went to Equilobia," she said. Adeze looked at her. "Obiora told his wife," Ugochi said. "His wife told. Everyone tells Obiora's wife everything. Did they help?" Adeze looked back at the tree. "They told me what the law says. They told me the system exists." A pause. "They also told me the system moves slower than 10 days. So what do? We know our rights," Adeze said. "We carry that. We see what comes next." She looked at the bats. "And we keep our hands busy," she said. On day 18, Chief Tobena received a phone call from a man who introduced himself as Izuchukwu Ofodili, Director of Ofodili Infrastructure Limited, regarding Federal Project FP, ANA, 2T317. Tobena had been waiting for this call for almost 2 years. The project was a highway access road that, when completed, would open 3 local government areas to commercial traffic for the first time. Tobena owned farmland on the eastern boundary of the original survey corridor. He had been told, by someone who knew someone in the State Ministry of Works, that the corridor would run through his land, which meant compensation discussions, which meant money. And, more importantly, it meant that the land's market value would increase by a factor he had done the arithmetic on many times and liked very much. The voice on the phone was measured and professional. This Ofodili man said he would be in Umueze in 3 days for a stakeholder meeting. 3 days was Thursday. Thursday was the morning before the ceremony. Tobena agreed with warm enthusiasm. He pressed his palm flat on the parlor table after the call ended and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Things were aligning. He had not connected the name on the phone to the name in the transfer reference. He had not looked carefully at the reference description on the wire that had appeared in his account 6 days ago. He had seen the amount, 4,631,000 naira, and noted that it appeared to be related to some outside attempt to interfere with a private family matter. He had put the money in his account, which was where money went, and he had put the legal letter from Helen Nwankwa's office in the drawer in the back room, where he put things that were someone else's opinion. He was the most powerful, informal authority in Umueze. He had been for 12 years. A wire transfer and a piece of paper from a lawyer he had never met were not going to change that. He kept planning. The night before the convoy came, Adeze could not sleep. This was not unusual. She had been sleeping badly for most of the 21 days. But this night was different in its quality. Not the restlessness of anxiety, but the particular wakefulness of someone who has made a decision and is living at the edges of it. She got up at 3:30 and went to her sewing table. She sat in the dark. She did not turn on the lantern. She just sat, her hands flat on the surface of the table, in the dark that felt solid and useful rather than threatening. Outside, a dog barked twice and went quiet. In the compound, her father's room was dark. Her mother had been awake until midnight and had finally found sleep. She sat at her table and thought about what she knew. She knew her rights. She had a piece of paper in an inner pocket that said so in government language. She knew the law was slow. She knew she had done what she could do with what she had. And she knew, not because she had been told, but because she was the kind of person who paid attention to things, that something was going to happen tomorrow. She did not know what, specifically. She only knew that the situation had a quality to it, now that situations acquire when they are about to change. Like the pressure change before rain. The air itself knows. At 5 she went back to bed. At 7:30 she was dressed. She ate the food her mother put in front of her because her mother needed her to eat. She drank her tea. She washed her cup and set it on the drying rack. At 8:42 she put her bag over her shoulder, the bag with the folded paper in the inner pocket, and she walked to Chief Tobena's compound. The compound that morning had been set up with the thoroughness of a man who took ceremony seriously. 16 white plastic chairs in rows, facing a table covered with a yellow cloth. Malta and fruit juice bottles arranged at one end. The courtyard swept so cleanly that the orange earth looked polished. Someone had brought 2 potted plants from inside and placed them on either side of the main entrance. 41 people had arrived by the time a Daisy got there. More would come. She was guided to a chair that had been positioned to be slightly separate from the rows, set forward, visible to the gathering, facing nothing in particular. She understood the staging. She sat down in the chair. She put her bag on her lap. She looked at the wall in front of her. There was no crack in this wall. It was smooth concrete, painted pale government green. She found the place where 2 brushstrokes overlapped. A barely visible seam in the paint, a slight darkening, not quite a line. She looked at that. Her father arrived at 9:49. He stood near the back. He did not look at her. At 10:04, Pastor Odili came in, wearing his white shirt and dark jacket, his Bible tucked under one arm. He glanced at Adieze once, and then fixed his gaze on the middle distance. At 10:09, Chief Tobena came out of the house in an agbada the color of old gold. Heavy, well-made, the kind of garment that announces its wearer before he speaks. He looked pleased with the arrangement of the chairs, with the attendants, with himself. He nodded at people in the rows. He looked at Adieze the way a person looks at a piece of furniture they have positioned for a reason. At 10:22 in the morning, the compound heard something before it saw anything. 3 engines. Not the sound of private cars. A different frequency. The sound of vehicles that have company logos on their doors and go where they are sent by a work schedule. The compound heard it, and the rows of chairs felt it, and people began to turn, instinctively, before any visual confirmation. Through the wide gate of Chief Tobena's compound. The gate kept open today because guests were expected. 3 vehicles entered. First, a Toyota Land Cruiser in white with a green and gold logo on the door. Offerdili I Infrastructure Ltd. EST 2018. Built to last. Second, a dark blue Honda Accord, recently washed, with a woman visible through the windscreen, her eyes on the compound entrance. Third, a pickup truck carrying survey rods, a level and orange traffic cones, with 2 men in hard hats in the cab. 3 vehicles. 43 people went very quiet. Chief Tobena turned from the table where he had been receiving a greeting, and the pleased expression on his face restructured itself. Not to panic, to calculation. He was a man who had learned to absorb surprises and reassemble himself around them. The Land Cruiser stopped. 3 workers stepped out. Green shirts, dark trousers, company lanyards. They moved to the side of the vehicle and stood with the quiet economy of motion that comes from working for someone who expects things done correctly. Then the front door of the Land Cruiser opened. He was 32 years old. He was not tall, but he had a way of taking up exactly the space he intended to take up, no more and no less. A white short-sleeved shirt tucked into dark trousers, no agbada, no gold, no jewelry beyond a watch on his left wrist. He stood beside the vehicle for a moment and looked at the compound, not scanning it, not performing, just looking. The compound looked back. From the far rows, a voice. A whisper, the kind that was not quite private. Is that not Nwaneka's son, the one who left? And then, another. Izuchukwu. And another, the Offerdili boy, that was him. He was the one who used to. He used to eat at the back of Mama Chioma's compound when his family had nothing. Offerdili Infrastructure, that is his company? The murmur moved through the rows like water, finding the lowest point. Chief Tabena took one step forward. Izuchukwu Ofadili did not look at him. He looked at Adaeze. He found her immediately in the arrangement. The chair placed forward. The woman in the blue Ankara, sitting the way she had been sitting through all of this, with a straightness that was not performance, with a stillness that was not resignation. Their eyes met across the swept orange earth of the courtyard, and what passed between them in those 4 seconds was not rescue and not gratitude, and not any of the things that stories usually put in a moment like this. It was simpler and stranger and more real than that. Recognition. He crossed the courtyard without hurrying. He stopped in front of her chair. He calibrated the distance carefully so that what he said next would not carry to the rows behind her. "I'm sorry I didn't come on day 1, he said. "I needed to do this right." She looked up at him. "Did you?" she said. "Yes." "Then let's see if you did," she said. He turned. Chief Tabena was already moving toward him from across the courtyard, and credit where it was due. The man had recovered from his surprise and was moving with the practiced ease of someone who had spent 60 years learning to manage rooms. "Izuchukwu!" He opened his arms. He smiled with genuine warmth, which was perhaps the most unsettling thing about him. The warmth was real, just directed at the wrong things. "My boy, I remember your father. Good man. We are proud of everything you have built. Is this about the project? We should go inside and..." Chief Tabena. Izuchukwu's voice was the voice he used in meetings, not cold, not warm, positioned for clarity. "Yes, we will discuss the project. But first..." He turned slightly, and the blue Honda's door opened and Barrister Helen Nwankwo stepped out. She walked across the courtyard with the hurried certainty of someone who knows exactly what she is about to do and has no interest in heightening the drama of it. She wore a navy suit. She carried a briefcase. She set the briefcase on the table at the front of the courtyard, the same table with the yellow cloth and the Malta bottles, and she opened it. She removed 2 documents. She placed them on the table. She looked at the gathered rows, not at Tabena, and she spoke clearly. "On the 12th of this month, at 11:47 in the morning, a CBN-certified electronic wire transfer of 4,631,000 naira was processed to the account of Chief Tabena Ikena Iwuanyanwiu, held at First Bank, Equilobia branch." She lifted the first document, a printed bank confirmation, stamped and dated. The transfer reference stated, in full, "Debt settlement, Nziogu Chima and Adaeze Chima. Reference Ofodili Infrastructure Limited." The transfer was received and accepted. Nobody breathed. On the 10th of this month, a formal legal notice was delivered to this compound by registered courier. The delivery was received and signed for at 3:42 in the afternoon. She lifted the second document, a courier delivery receipt. The notice cited Section 3 of the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act 2015, which states that no financial obligation or arrangement may constitute consideration in a marriage contract. It cited Section 3(1) of the Matrimonial Causes Act. It advised that any marriage ceremony proceeding on the basis of this now cleared debt would constitute a violation of federal law. She set the document down. Chief Tabena received this notice 12 days ago. She looked at Tabena then. "The debt is settled," she said. "The arrangement is dissolved. Adaeze Chima owes this man nothing. Her father owes this man nothing." She folded her hands in front of her. "We are here this morning because Chief Tabena chose to proceed with a ceremony after being formally notified that the basis for that ceremony no longer legally exists. We are here to make that choice visible." The courtyard was the kind of quiet that comes when 43 people have just been shown something about themselves and are processing what it means. Chief Tabena had been alive for 60 years and had been the informal authority of Umueze for 12 of them. He had a face for difficult moments. He arranged it now. "This is a traditional matter," he said. He said it with authority. with the easy confidence of a man who has said such things before and been right. A wire transfer and a legal notice from an equilobia lawyer do not dissolve what was agreed between men in the presence of a community. What was witnessed here, Chief? Helen Nwankwo's voice did not rise. She spoke the way a surgeon speaks during a procedure, with the steadiness of someone whose concern is doing the thing correctly, not impressing anyone with it. If any ceremony proceeds today, I will file a formal complaint with the Anambra State Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Welfare before sundown. The complaint will name you specifically, will attach both documents currently on this table, and will note that you received legal notice of dissolution, accepted financial settlement of the underlying debt, and chose to proceed regardless. She paused. That is not a threat. That is a procedure. I want you to understand the distinction. What Barrister Nwankwo did not say, but what Chief Tobena heard in the precise gap between her words, was this. The complaint would become a file. The file would have his name on it. The file would eventually be seen by people in Lagos, in government offices, in business circles, and more immediately and relevantly it would be seen by his son, who worked in Abuja for a company that handled federal tenders, and who had spent 8 years carefully not being associated with his father's more informal operations. Chief Tobena was a practical man. He had always been a practical man. Practical men recognize when a position has become untenable, and they do not throw good effort after bad. He looked at the rows of chairs. He looked at the Malta bottles. He looked at Mrs. Ihe Jerika, who was looking at her hands. He looked at Pastor Odili, who was looking at his Bible as though it had become unfamiliar to him. He said nothing. This was the silence. Not the silence of a dramatic confrontation, not a villain yielding to a hero's speech. Just the silence of a man who had accepted money that dissolved the basis for what he was doing, who had ignored a legal notice, who had chosen to continue anyway, and who had been shown, in documented form, in front of 43 witnesses, that this was precisely what had happened. The documents on the table did not care about informal authority. They did not respond to the weight of a name. They simply were printed, stamped, dated, delivered, and they said exactly what they said. Izuchukwu turned from the table and walked toward the back of the compound. He walked to where Nzeogwu Chima was standing near the gatepost. He had thought about this part. He had thought about it more than the legal mechanism, more than the logistics. He had thought about what to say to the man who had made the decision that started all of this, and he had come to a position on it. And the position was not for the crowd. The crowd had already received what it needed. This was for Nzeogwu alone. He stopped in front of him. Nzeogwu was 52 years old and looked, at this moment, like a man who had been walking toward something for a very long time, and had just arrived and found that what was at the end of the walk was not what he had been moving toward at all. His hands were at his sides. His face had the emptiness of a person whose most important justifications have just been removed. Izu spoke quietly, low enough that the Rose could not hear clearly. "Sir," he said, "I know the debt was real. I know you were desperate. I know there are things that brought you to that back room that I will never understand from the outside, because I was not there, and I did not carry what you were carrying." He paused. "But your daughter has walked through 21 days of this village, treating her like a number on a ledger. She made herself a dress no one ordered. She took a cake to Equilobia, and went to a government office alone to find out what the law said about her own rights. She has more dignity in this situation than this compound has ever accommodated." Another pause. "She does not owe you gratitude. She does not owe you anything at all. What you owe her, that is a conversation between you and whatever is left of your conscience. It is not a conversation I am the right person to have with you." Nzeogwu said nothing. He could not look at Izu's face. He could not look at his daughter's. He put his face in his hands, and then he stood there with his face in his hands, and the sounds that came from him were not a performance. They were the sounds of a man who had run out of the story he had been telling himself. Adeze had watched all of it from her chair, the documents, the silence, the moment Tobena stopped speaking. She had watched Izu cross the compound to her father, and she had watched her father put his face in his hands. Now she stood up. She reached into the inner pocket of her bag. She took out the single-folded page from the Legal Aid Council office. The page with the government letterhead and the office stamp and Miss Adaora U. Mezu-like's initials in the corner. She had been carrying it for 10 days. She walked to where Ugochi was standing near the side wall, and she held the page up. Not dramatically, not as a moment of theater, but simply so that it was visible, so that it existed in the space, so that 43 people could see that it had been in her possession before this morning, that she had found her way to it herself. "I went to the Legal Aid Council 11 days ago," she said. Her voice was clear and even. "I went alone, on a cake, with what I had in my savings pouch. I asked what the law said about what was being done to me. They told me, and they gave me this document." She lowered the page. "I want everyone in this compound to know that I was not waiting to be saved. I was looking for the mechanism that would let me take care of myself. The mechanism was slower than 10 days. She glanced at Izuchukwu, then back at the gathering. "He made it faster. I am grateful for faster." She folded the page and put it back in her bag. She looked at the 43 people. Not with anger, not with bitterness. With the particular clarity of someone who has had a very extended look at who people are under pressure and has decided to be honest about it. "I was never for sale," she said. "I want every person here who stood in this compound 3 weeks ago and watched and said nothing, and every person here today, to carry that with them, not as punishment, as information, about what you chose and what that choice cost." Nobody spoke. In the third row, Mrs. Uchenna Ihejirika quietly moved her bag from the table onto her shoulder. She did not stand up yet, she just moved her bag. Izu looked at Adize across the courtyard. He said, "I know. Not an apology, not a declaration. Just the acknowledgement of someone who had listened and understood and agreed." From near the gate, a sound. Old Mrs. Equincy, the widow with the green dress, who had stopped by the road 10 days ago and heard Tobena in the doorway, had been standing at the back since before the vehicles arrived. She had come early, quietly, and no one had particularly noticed her. Now she walked slowly across the courtyard to where Chief Tobena was standing at the table with the documents in front of him. She stopped beside him. She was not quite as tall as his shoulder. She looked at his face. "She told you what she was, Chief," she said, quietly. Without anger, almost conversationally. 14 days ago, in her workroom. You did not listen." She walked back to the gate and left. Chief Tobena did not respond to this. He stood at his table in his old gold agbada in his swept courtyard, with the Malta bottles unopened and the plastic chairs full of people he could not make leave. He had nothing left to manage. The infrastructure meeting happened that afternoon. Izu's survey team set up the maps in the same courtyard 2 hours later, after the plastic chairs had been stacked to the side and the Malta bottles had been taken back inside. Chief Tobena came because a practical man does not walk away from his best remaining economic prospect, because the morning did not go as he had planned. Helen Nwankwo had already driven back to Equilobia. She had said goodbye to Izu with a nod and a summary of the paperwork, needed to formally close the matter, and she had gone. The survey lead was a young engineer named Chukwemeka, who had the efficient seriousness of someone who takes pleasure in accuracy. He laid out the updated alignment data and explained the technical findings. The proposed road corridor, he said, had been reviewed based on 30 days of geotechnical sampling. The original alignment, running through the eastern boundary of several private landholdings, including Chief Tobena's, had a documented soil instability issue along a 400-meter section. High clay content. The kind of composition that required expensive stabilization treatment for heavy vehicle traffic. Projected cost increase. Significant. The revised alignment 300 meters east followed a laterite ridge with better load-bearing characteristics and avoided the problematic section entirely. He showed the data tables. He answered questions about the sampling methodology. He was precise and thorough and entirely without drama. Chief Tabena's farmland was not on the revised corridor. He sat through the meeting with the face of a man doing arithmetic that will not come right, regardless of how many times he checks it. When it was done, he thanked the survey lead and walked back into his house without further conversation. What followed for Tabena in the months ahead was not dramatic. He did not lose his home. He did not lose his motorcycles or his generator. The 4,631,000 naira sat in his account, and he spent it on things he had been intending to spend money on. And the practical material facts of his life continued much as before. What he lost was not material. In Umuez, informal authority is the only kind that ultimately matters. It is the authority to be the person that people call when they have a problem, the person whose name is said with a specific weight, the person at the center of the informal systems that make a village function when the formal ones are absent. It is built slowly, over years, through a specific combination of resources and reliability, and the willingness of a community to keep accepting it. It does not survive being shown, publicly, that it operates by deciding to pocket money and ignore a legal notice and proceed anyway. The weight began to leave the name. Not all at once. Nothing happens all at once in the way that would make a satisfying story. Gradually, the way a tide goes out. You look up and the water is not where it was, and you cannot say precisely when it moved. Two families who owed him money came to him in the 3 months after the convoy and paid him back. Not because they were wealthy enough to do so comfortably. Because they had found other arrangements, a microfinance cooperative in Equilobia, a family pooling, and they wanted to be done owing him specifically. A third family that had been on the verge of approaching him for a loan went to the cooperative instead. He still held the informal authority of a man with more resources than those around him. But the specific weight, the gravity of the name, that was gone. And you cannot demand that people reinstate it. It is given, or it is not. On a Tuesday 7 days after the convoy, Pastor James Odili came to Adeze's workroom. He knocked, actually knocked. She told him to come in, and he came in and sat on the small stool, and he did not open the Bible he was holding. He sat with it against his knee and his hands clasped on top of it. He was 60 years old and had been a pastor for 27 years. He had baptized Adeze. He had married her cousin. He had baptized children and buried elders and sat with people in the worst nights of their lives. And he believed genuinely and without performance in the things he preached. He was a man who tried to do the right thing. He had stood in Chief Tabena's courtyard with his Bible and prayed over a transaction that should not have had any words prayed over it, and he had known, while he was doing it, exactly what it was. "I prayed over something I should not have prayed over," he said. He looked at the floor between his feet, then looked at her. "I understood what I was standing in the middle of. Someone had explained the situation to me beforehand, and I understood it. And I told myself it was not my place to interfere in a community matter, in a family arrangement. I told myself the most I could do was to pray that something good would come of it." He stopped. "That is not honesty. The honest version is that I was afraid. I was afraid of disrupting what the community had already accepted, and I chose my own comfort." He looked at her steadily. "I don't have an excuse. I have a reason. The reason is not good enough." Adeze had not stopped working. She was finishing the alterations on a blouse, her hands moving with the practiced ease of someone who has sewn for 15 years. She looked at the fabric, not at him. "Pastor," she said, "I will not tell you whether I forgive you. That is not something I am going to resolve in this conversation, or tell you how to feel about. She turned the blouse on the table. What I will say is that you already know what to do with what you are feeling right now. If you are the person I have believed you to be, and I still believe you are, you will do it. He sat for another minute. Then he said, "You are your mother's daughter." Daisy's hands paused for one beat. Then, "She is stronger than anyone gave her credit for." He got up. He thanked her and left. The following Sunday, Pastor Lee preached from the book of Amos, which is not the comfortable choice. He chose the passage about justice rolling down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, and he spent 40 minutes on what it means for a community to allow injustice to pass in silence. Not through malice, but through the comfortable decision to accept what has already been decided by someone else. He used no names. He did not need to. 3 women in the congregation cried. Mrs. Ihajirika did not come to church that Sunday. She came the following week and sat in her usual seat and looked straight ahead. Over the months that followed, she became quieter. Not as punishment from anyone, as the natural consequence of someone who has learned, publicly, where the actual boundaries of their authority lie. The village noticed. No one said anything about it directly. These were the things that happened in the space between what was said and what was understood. Nziogu Chima did not speak to his daughter about what had happened for 6 weeks. He woke every morning before 5 and went to his land. He came home when the work was done. He ate what Nkechi put on the table. He said little. He did not ask Adeze for her forgiveness. He did not construct an apology or prepare a speech. He did not come to her room. This was, without either of them saying so, the right thing to do. Adeze had been carrying weight for 21 days that was not hers to carry. She did not need, on top of the weight she was still putting down, to carry her father's guilt as well. She did not need to be the person who made him feel better about what he had done. She needed him to be present, to work, to be a changed man without performing the change. He also stopped drinking. Not dramatically, not with an announcement, just stopped. Nkechi noticed after 2 weeks and said nothing. Adeze noticed after a month and said nothing. He had simply decided, in whatever interior process was happening, in that man during those weeks of early mornings on the land, that he was not going to add that particular cost to the ones he was already paying. One evening in the 6th week after the convoy, Adeze came to the doorway of the yard and sat on the step nearby while he shelled groundnuts in the last of the light. She didn't say anything significant. She asked about the cassava on the far plot. He said it was coming up well. The rains had been good this season. She said that was good. He said yes. They sat in the quiet until it got dark, and then she went inside. It was not forgiveness, and it was not resolution. It was the beginning of a relationship being rebuilt from more honest materials. Harder materials, without as much assumption in them, with more deliberate choosing, every day, to continue. She slipped the letter under her mother's bedroom door 6 weeks after the convoy. Not while Nkechi was in the room. She left it and went back to her sewing table. The letter said, "Mama, I know what you could not do, and I know why. I am not going to tell you it was all right, because it wasn't. But I am also not asking you to have been braver than you were. I know what you were facing. I know what that night cost you to come and tell me yourself. What I am asking is this. Be present now. That is all I need from you. Not an explanation, not an apology that will cost you more than you have. Just present. That is enough." She heard, through the wall, her mother cry, a long, quiet sound, the sound of something that has been held in too long. She did not go in. She had said what she needed to say. Now it was Nkechi's to do what she could with. The school happened because of 3 things, in the order they arrived. The first was Ugochi, on an ordinary evening in the compound, saying, "You have been teaching me how to hem my own clothes for 4 years without charging me anything for it. That is essentially a curriculum. Why are you not monetizing it?" The second was a woman named Mrs. Chiamaka Onyekwe, who appeared at Adese's door 6 weeks after the convoy. She ran the Artisan Development Registration Program for Anambra State, and she had heard about Adese through a chain of connections that Adese could not trace precisely. She brought a pamphlet and sat down on the small stool in the workroom and said, "There is a support scheme for registered women's craft cooperatives and instruction programs. You would qualify under the instructor pathway. The application is 8 pages." Adese took the pamphlet. The third was a flatbed truck that arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the convoy, while she was still working. The driver knocked at the gate and said he had a delivery for Adese Chima. She went out and found him unloading corrugated zinc roofing sheets, roof trusses, galvanized bolts, and ridge caps onto the ground beside the compound wall. She looked at this for a moment. "From who?" she said. The driver handed her an envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. "These are for the space where the things your hands make will be made. I looked at your workroom when I was at the compound. The current roof will not last another 2 rainy seasons. This one will last 20. Good luck with whatever you build. Izu." She stood in the road for a moment, holding the note. Then she went inside, picked up her phone, and called Ujuchi. "Find me 2 men who can lay a roof," she said. "Good ones. I will pay correctly." The school opened 6 months after the convoy, formally registered under the Anambra State Artisan and Craft Development Scheme, with a proper iron roof on the extended workroom and a hand-lettered sign that Ugochi's younger brother had painted on a wood board. Chima Tailoring Entity, EST, 2024. First intake, 8 students, ages 18 to 26. Women from Umueze and the neighboring town of Nkwo Aba. 3 paid the full tuition of 15,000 naira per term. 2 paid 7,500. 3 paid nothing. The 3 who paid nothing were the ones Adese had actively identified and recruited. Women from families with no disposable income, who had the skill and the interest, but no path to formalize either. She had decided, before she wrote the registration application, that the school would always carry at least 3 full bursary places per intake, and that this was not a feature she would negotiate away when things got tight. She taught 5 days a week, 8 to 2. She took private orders in the afternoons because the school was not yet paying its own costs, and she was not going to build something on the foundation of wishful thinking. She knew the difference between principle and arithmetic, and she respected both. The notebook now held different things. Not unsent letters. Notes on what she was learning about running a small institution. How to negotiate with fabric suppliers. How to structure lesson sequences so that a student who arrived with no experience could reach a professional standard in 6 months. Observations about her students. A record of what worked and what didn't. 1 page had a single entry. "Today, a student asked me why we practice hand stitching if machines exist. I said, because if the machine breaks, your hands should not become useless." She thought about this for a while. Then she said, "Like knowing your rights, even when the system is slow." I said that was exactly it. At 18 months, the school had 23 students. Adese submitted the application for the Anambra State Women's Artisan Development Grant in September. 14 pages. Written herself on a Saturday morning, drawing on 18 months of financial records and the registration data and her projections for the next 2 years. She sent it by the correct channel, with the correct documentation before the deadline. The grant was 1,400,000 naira. She received the confirmation in December, 2 weeks before the grant disbursement. She told Ugochi before she told anyone else. She put 900,000 toward 2 industrial sewing machines, ordered through a supplier in Onitsha that Izu had introduced her to 8 months earlier. The remaining 500,000 went into the school's operating reserve, not to spend, but to be there, so that when the thin months came, which they would, She had a foundation, and not an emergency. The machines arrived on a Thursday. 2 of her students helped unload them. They set them up in the extended workroom and then stood back and looked at them. Ugochi was there. She looked at Adeze. "Say something," she said. "This is a moment. Say something appropriate." Adeze looked at the machines. She thought about the chair in Chief Tabena's courtyard, and the crack in the wall with no crack in it, and the kike to Equilobia, and the folded paper in her bag, and the dress in wine-colored brocade still wrapped in cloth in the wardrobe. "I want to get to work," she said. They got to work. Izuchuku Ofodili visited Umueze 4 times in the 18 months after the convoy. The first was 3 weeks later, when his survey team returned to close out their phase of the Access Road project. He stopped at the compound, drank a cup of tea that Nkechi made without being asked, and set in front of him without ceremony, and confirmed the roofing materials had arrived and been received correctly. The second was the day the school opened. He did not attend the opening. She had not asked him to, and he had understood that he was not supposed to. But he called that evening. "How did it go?" he said. 8 students, she said. 3 full bursaries. "Good. The roof held through October." "Good timber," he said. "I specified good timber." "Thank you for the materials," she said. "Thank you for using them for something." They talked for 11 minutes about practical things. The grant application process, the question of whether the artisan scheme covered equipment maintenance costs. It did not, it turned out, which was useful to know before assuming it did. A contact at the state ministry, who had navigated a similar administrative question. He sent her the contact the following morning. The third visit was when his company broke ground on the next phase of the Access Road project, 12 months in. He was in the area for 2 weeks. He stopped at the school one afternoon and looked at it from the doorway. 3 students at machines. The afternoon light coming in at a useful angle. The sound of the machines and the occasional instruction from the young woman Adieze had hired to help with the second group. He stood in the doorway for a while. He did not go in. Adeze was in the middle of a lesson. She glanced at him once, acknowledged him with a look, and continued the lesson. When it was done and the students had left, he said, "It looks real." "It is real," she said. "I know." He said it simply, without any weight on it beyond what the words carried. "I know it is." He left before the compound had fully quieted. She watched him go, and then turned back to put the machines to rest for the evening. The fourth visit was around the 18-month mark, after the grant had come through. He was in Equilobia for a meeting and had called 2 days ahead. He sat in her workroom after the school day ended, on the same small stool that had held Mrs. Ekwensi and Pastor Odili and Chief Tabena and Mrs. Onyekwer with her pamphlet. She made tea on the electric ring that the school's electricity connection now powered. Outside, the compound was quiet in the specific way of late afternoons when work is done. They talked, not the way a story would arrange for them to talk. Not with significance or weight or anything that announced itself as important. Just 2 people who had come from the same place and gone to different places and found themselves in the same room, talking about the things that were actually happening in their lives. He told her about a project in Enugu where the political complications had caused a 3-month delay, and the client was now threatening a penalty clause that had been in the contract for exactly this kind of delay, which he had tried to negotiate out of the contract at the outset and had failed. She told him about a student whose family had decided, in the student's 3rd week of enrollment, that she should be married instead of finishing the course. She had driven to the family's house with Ugochi and sat down with them for a 2-hour conversation, at the end of which the student came back. "What did you say to them?" he asked. "I showed them the income projections," she said, based on her skill level and what a skilled seamstress earns in Equilobia and Arca. I showed them the numbers. I did not appeal to feelings. I gave them the arithmetic. He looked at her. The arithmetic. People respond to the arithmetic, she said, more reliably than most things. Something crossed his face, not a smile exactly. More, the expression of someone who has just heard a thing that confirms something they already knew and are glad to hear confirmed. I should hire you to negotiate my penalty clause, he said. You cannot afford me, she said. He laughed. A real laugh, the kind that arrives without being planned. Outside the compound was the color of late light. Umueze will remember the convoy in the way that villages remember the things that matter most to them. Not in any official record, not in any formal history, but in the way certain conversations begin, and in the way certain decisions get made, now that were made differently before. 3 daughters in neighboring families were consulted before arrangements were made for them, in the year following the convoy. This had not always happened before. None of the families announced this as a change in policy. They simply did it, and it was noticed, and the noticing was quiet and did not need to be louder. Chief Tabena Iwanyanwu was still in his house, still had his generator and his motorcycles, still had money. What he did not have was the weight in his name, the informal gravitational pull that makes some people the center of a village's decision-making. That had gone, and it was not the kind of thing you could get back by trying. Nzio Gu Chima's cassava came up well the following year and the year after. He had entered a shared equipment and storage arrangement with 2 other farmers, which he probably should have done a decade earlier, and which made the arithmetic work, in a way that individual farming had not. He took no more loans. He was working his way, slowly, toward a version of himself that he could look at. Mrs. Ihajirika came to the school's 1-year event. She sat in the back row. She did not speak to Adeze directly, but she came and sat and watched the demonstration that the students put on, and when it was done, she was one of the people who stayed to help fold the chairs. What she was working out, privately, in the quieter life she was now leading, was not something anyone could see into. That was her own work to do. Pastor Odili contributed 12,000 naira of his own salary to sponsor the first full bursary student. He did not announce this. He gave it to Adeze in an envelope one morning and asked her to put it wherever it would be most useful. There is a conversation that gets had sometimes about bride price. The Igba Inkwu in Igbo tradition, the lobola in Zulu custom, the various forms of it that exist across the continent, and the conversation usually ends up in the wrong place. The argument becomes about whether the tradition itself is acceptable, which is not the interesting argument. The interesting argument is about what happens when financial desperation is allowed to hijack a tradition that was never designed to function as a financial instrument. Bride price, in its origin and at its best, is not a purchase. It is an expression of gratitude from one family to another, an acknowledgement that they are receiving someone of real value, and that they understand the weight of that receiving. It moves in a particular direction with a particular meaning. In communities where it operates as it was designed to operate, it is an affirmation of the bride's worth, not a price tag. What happened to Adeze Chima was not bride price. It was a debt transfer. One family owed money to a man. The man accepted a person in lieu of the money. The distinction between those 2 things is not subtle. One is a cultural expression of value. The other is a ledger entry. The law in Nigeria is clear on this. The Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act 2015, the Marriage Act, the Matrimonial Causes Act. They say the same thing in different registers and for different purposes. No financial obligation constitutes grounds for marriage. Consent must be free and full. Coercion, including financial coercion, makes any arrangement void. What the law is less clear on is how to arrive in time. How to be present in a village where informal authority moves faster than registered courier, and the Legal Aid Council has a backlog. This is the gap, not a flaw in the principle. The principle is sound. A gap between the principle and its delivery, This is where Adias lived for 21 days, in the space between what the law said and how quickly the law could arrive to say it. She filled part of that gap herself with a kick and an exercise of will, and a piece of paper she folded into thirds and carried in her bag. Izuchukwu Ofordili filled the rest of it, with a bank transfer and a lawyer, and 3 vehicles, and the specific quiet power of documented fact in a room where documented fact had never been expected. Neither of them did it the way the story of a rescue is supposed to go. There was no single moment of triumph, no before and after, with a clear line between them. There was a compound and a table with documents on it, and a long silence, and then the slow, unglamorous, essential work of aftermath, which is where most of the actual living gets done. What Umueze will tell you, if you ask, is not the story of a rescue. What they will tell you, if you press them, if you ask the people who were there, and the people who heard from the people who were there, is the story of a young woman who already knew what she was, and who spent 21 days in the middle of a situation that was working very hard to tell her otherwise, and who declined to become what the situation required. They will tell you about the crack in the wall. They will tell you about the keiki to Equilobia at 500 naira of bus fare, and 14,700 naira in a savings pouch. They will tell you about the notebook under the fabric rolls on the bottom shelf. And they will tell you about the school, the one with the good iron roof, and the hand-painted sign, and the 2 industrial machines and 23 students sitting in afternoon light, learning what their hands can do and what they are entitled to understand about the world they live in. The village of Umueze is not a finished story. No village is. The moral failures that happened there are not resolved in the way that stories usually resolve things, cleanly, with clear punishment and clear redemption, and a final image that contains the whole meaning of what occurred. Instead, the village continues. It carries what happened the way you carry a scar. It has changed the landscape of the skin. It has its history. It is present in the room even when no one mentions it. Chief Tabena is still in his house, and Ziogwu is still on his land. Mrs. Ihejirika is quieter. Pastor Odili preaches differently. 3 daughters were consulted. 2 machines hum in an extended workroom under a roof that will last 20 years. And Adies Chima has work to do. If this story has stayed with you, please subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. And tell me this, what do you think justice looks like? Not just in the moment of the convoy, but in the years that come after. The slow kind, the kind built one decision at a time. I read every comment. I want to know what you think. Across the world, in places you would not expect, there are families where debt has a human face, where economic desperation compresses years of love into a single wrong decision. The systems built to protect people are real, and the people who work in them are often trying, but they are slow. There is always a gap between what the law says and when the law arrives. That gap is where the most important choices get made. By individuals, by communities, by the people who decide whether to speak or to look away. What is also real is this. People are not collateral. They are not the sum of what their families owe or what their communities have already decided about them. They carry their own value inside themselves, independent of any arrangement made on their behalf, independent of any transaction that attempted to include them without asking. Adies knew this. She carried it with her to the legal aid office and back on a cake, and through 21 days of a situation that was trying very hard to replace it with a different understanding of what she was worth. She carried it into a courtyard and said it out loud in a single clear sentence to 43 people who needed to hear it. That is not a small thing. That is a very large thing, quietly done.